What is leadership communication and why the heck does it matter to me? You are probably thinking this right now. I know I would be. I'd be thinking, I know what leadership is, I know what communication is, so what can you possibly teach me? Well, I'm hoping a whole lot. A focus on leadership communication, it empowers you to take small but meaningful steps at making your work life what you want it to be, rather than what it may be or what it has been. Today on the Communicative Leader, we're going to dive right into the connection between leadership and communication. Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah O'Million Hodges. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be. Thanks for joining me on the Communicative Leader. As an organizational communication scholar who focuses primarily on leadership, I can't wait to chat with you about common organizational obstacles, like forging a strong relationship with your leader or with your employees, how to navigate conflict and those difficult workplace conversations. We're also going to talk about how to work well with that peer you just haven't been able to connect with. I'm a professor of communication. I've written 2 books focused on leader and team communication, and I'm working on my 3rd. I've also authored dozens of peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on leadership communication, and I've had the awesome opportunity to present my work worldwide. But whether I'm talking to my family or working with an organization, the underlying question always seems to be the same. How do I make my workplace what I want it to be? 15 years ago, I left industry for academics to help explore and offer concrete, pragmatic answers to that very question. Work can be amazing. Work can also be excruciating. I get it. I've worked in nonprofits, for-profit, healthcare, food service, and of course, education. After about a week of my first full-time job after my undergrad degree, all I kept thinking is, how does anyone make it to retirement? There was constant gossiping, and it seemed like the only way people communicated was through back channels and never to anyone's face. Not the healthiest of organizational environments, and unfortunately, something that I've also learned in all of my years of research is not that all uncommon either. Certainly, my perspective has deepened and evolved since that first full-time experience, and after years of teaching and researching and thinking and writing in this area, I'm really excited to share some of the tips that I've picked up along the way. Today on the Communicative Leader, we're going to unpack leadership communication and consider how this concept can help you at work, any industry, any level. Added bonus, my friends, when we are mindful of our leadership communication, we tend to see improvements in all of our relationships, not just those in the workplace. We see it at home with romantic partners, kids, family members, friends, perhaps most importantly, the way we see ourselves and the way we talk to ourselves. So let's dive in. Today we're going to focus on 3 key ideas. 1, the yardstick used to assess your leadership ability is your ability as a communicator. 2, not only is communication the measure used to assess your leadership skills, it's also the most accessible and powerful tool that you have. And 3, employees are very, very savvy in terms of discerning managers' behaviors. All right, so let's start with that first one. The yardstick used to assess your leadership ability is your communication ability. Let's think about this. Your skill as a communicator also serves as the primary way, right? The number one way in which others come to think about you and your skill as a leader. You might be thinking, what? How does that make any sense? What about the outcomes of my leadership? What about my successes? How does my skill as a communicator impact my leadership ability? Well, my friends, these go hand in hand. Without a solid focus on your communication skills, you're not likely to rack up too many successes, or these wins are likely to be short-lived. We think about the elements of leading or being in a formal authority role, right? A manager, supervisor, director. These positions are very, very visible. You're thinking, hang on, 1 minute, aren't all roles visible? Well, yes, of course. But when you're in a formal leadership role, others are literally looking to you to set the tone, for feedback, for cues on how to react, to take the pulse on a decision or a meeting outcome, to mentor, right, etc., etc., etc. It goes on and on. So as a manager, director, supervisor, team lead, even your own leader is looking at you too. They're watching to see how you interact with your team, how you handle yourself in meetings, how your performance reflects on them. See, my friends, when in formal leadership roles, you are very, very visible. Your verbal and nonverbal communication behaviors are on display, and this is what prompts others to make judgments about your leadership ability. If we simplify leadership to its most basic of definitions, it means to influence. With that in mind, if a leader can't communicate a clear vision, doesn't develop productive or trusting relationships, listen to their concerns, then his or her tenure is likely to be brief. Also, as the workgroup employee with the most position power, leader is charged with communicating on behalf of the team to argue for additional resources, alleviate other obstacles. If they're not able to do that effectively, that tenure is going to be rocky and, again, very short-lived. But when we think about leadership through a communicative lens, then we can start to see how these roles are essentially built on that foundation of communication ability. Right? Communication, communication, communication. We're going to say it a million more times. We're going to be annoyed with how much we say it. But the more that you are thinking about your communication, the more successful, the more empowered you're going to be. So now we're going to make this idea of communication ability as being synonymous as leadership ability. We're going to make it a bit more concrete. We're going to think about organizational relationships. We're going to think about communicating to establish workgroup expectations. We're going to think about navigating conflict. Some argue that a leader's primary function is to help grow and develop those around them. Others might dismiss this. They might say, the leader's primary job is to focus on production and outcomes. Well, listen, regardless of your individual view, you need to connect and communicate with team members. Research that I've conducted shows employees are more likely to be creative, they're more likely to be innovative when they feel supported by their leader and peers, right? Makes sense. We don't feel like we're going to be ridiculed. Some of my colleagues and friends, Hassan Abu Bakar and Stacy Connaughton, recently found that when we have trusting relationships at work, it's more likely to lead to ethical communication and employees engaging in helping behaviors at work. Amazing, right? So whether we're taking a servant leadership approach or we have our eyes focused on numbers, focused on the output, investing in the relationships we share with our employees is going to enhance the way they see us as leaders. But most importantly, it's going to result in a positive workplace experience, likely with more creative solutions and a more collaborative group. Just as we communicate to build and maintain relationships in our workplace, those entitled leadership positions, again, my directors, my team leads, my managers, my supervisors, you are using communication to set expectations for your group. We're going to have whole episodes dedicated to setting the tone for the group, making the work group the unit you dream of. But for now, we're just going to hit a few high points to illustrate how your communication ability impacts others' perceptions of your leadership. So imagine with me, my friends, you've landed your dream job. You've landed it in the dream department, right? You are pretty much on cloud nine and you have so many ideas. You have all the ideas because you have spent years working in this area. You've been keeping track of what you do differently, considering how much better the team would be when you are at the helm. You're here. Now all you have to do is clearly, concisely, and consistently communicate your expectations. What behaviors are encouraged and rewarded? Which are discouraged? How do members address you? How do they address each other? What are the expectations for collaboration and idea sharing? How exactly do you articulate that plan you've been playing with and dreaming about in tangible, concrete terms while generating excitement and buy-in for your team? Yep, you got it. You guessed it, communication. Another area where communication is paramount, conflict. Think about how you felt when I said that word, conflict. For many, it might have come with some sort of physical reaction, a cringe, a tightening of a muscle, uncomfortable shifting in your seat, defensive posture. Are your arms crossed? Did you lean back? Did you make yourself just a little bit smaller by turning your shoulders and arms inward? This is a totally normal response. A lot of us are less than comfortable with that word, right? And even less comfortable when conflict is in front of us. But my friends, I have to tell you, as an organizational communication scholar, my peers and I, we see conflict as a good thing, sometimes a really great thing. Now, don't hit pause. Don't dismiss me yet for another podcast. Kind of roll with me for a minute here. Conflict means that people are invested. Conflict means that topics are really important and that we're thinking of alternatives. We're thinking of best options and we're thinking about possible consequences. I don't know. I understand conflict can be a little uncomfortable, but if we are thinking about all of these criteria ahead of time of what's going to set us up for success, what these, possible consequences are going to be, that sounds pretty great. So again, while it may mean that there are some disagreements and certainly, of course, some possible hurt feelings, it is far, far better than the alternative. A workplace filled with members who don't care, they're not thinking a few steps ahead, and are just happy to do what they're told without question. And here's the thing about conflict. Certainly, it might be more comfortable to avoid it in that moment, right? And we've been there before. We've experienced conflict, whether it's at work or at home with a romantic partner. A lot of times that can be accompanied by a sense of loss or maybe a sense of winning or losing, right? Conflict can be very, very difficult and painful for sure. It doesn't mean it has to be, especially in the organizational setting when we're reminded that we're all on the same team. We're literally in the same organization working to make the project or the outcome the best it possibly can be. So as a leader, you're tasked with facilitating that discussion, which may include leading members through conflict. And listen, here's a really important thing to remember. Ignoring conflict does not mean that this misunderstanding is resolved or that it's going to go away on its own. Instead, when we leave conflict unaddressed, I always think about it as growing legs, right? So then it starts to move, and now it can attach itself to other unrelated aspects of work. So, for example, we might have a member, right? A team member, they're really upset at how a leader talked to them in a different meeting. They might find themselves snapping at a peer or ignoring their leader's advice on a different project simply because that initial conflict, that exchange that didn't go so well, because it felt so yucky and it is still there. So my friends, again, part and parcel of leadership communication, you're acknowledging conflict, facilitating dialogue, and helping parties move toward resolution. So now we're at a place where we can recap that first key takeaway. The yardstick used to assess your leadership ability is your ability as a communicator. What are 3 very visible ways that we can see this in the workplace, in developing relationships, in setting expectations, and in navigating conflict? Knowing that others are making interpretations about our leadership based on our verbal and nonverbal behaviors might feel a little strange, especially if you're new to a communicative view of leadership. I get it. It kind of gets in your head. What's my posture saying about me? Uncross my arms. Okay, open shoulders. Shoot, I need to be thinking about what's coming out of my mouth at the same time. But my friends, there is power, so much power in simply being aware of this fact. It leads us to our second key idea. Not only is communication the measure used to assess your leadership ability, it is also the most accessible, powerful tool you have. Added bonus, it is free. It doesn't require technology or years of education or training, just some intention and reflection. So let's do a simple activity together. You decide you want to ask your manager for a meeting to talk about your progress and, throw in your hat for this upcoming project. So we're going to go up to our manager and we're going to propose the request. We're going to consider 2 different ways in which we can make this request. Okay, request 1. I was kind of hoping maybe we could get together at some point, maybe over coffee, to talk about next steps, if you want, if you can make the time. Period, right? The request has been made. We asked for what we wanted, a chat about our career progression, somewhat informally over coffee. Done. Yet let's consider another way of still achieving our goal, that request for a conversation. Request 2. I know that the Smith project is set to begin next month. I'm confident I am positioned to lead that project successfully, and I've already mapped out initial ideas. I'd like to discuss these ideas in addition to my growth and development in the team this week, with Thursday afternoon work. The heart of both requests is essentially the same, right? A check-in with the manager to consider what one's career development looks like. Yeah, while both of these requests are seeking that same end goal, they're radically different in terms of showcasing credibility, in showcasing poise, and showcasing leadership ability. Which of these requests are you more likely to assign to lead the Smith project? Yep, number 2, a no-brainer, right? Why? You got it. Spoiler alert, boils down to communication. Why do we boil it down to communication? Again, you guessed it, communication is the indicator of our leadership ability and our greatest means of advocating for ourselves and our ideas. This leads us to our communication challenge for the week. In my mind right now, I'm thinking about the old cash cab, the red light challenge, and kind of hearing that. And now that I've returned from my tangent, we're going to look at avoiding powerless language. So again, every week here on the Communicative Leader, we're going to have some simple communication-based solutions, some ideas for making your workplace what you want it to be. When we think about avoiding powerless language, we're going to return to request 1 because we saw some of that present there. Some of the examples of powerless language in that first request, I was kind of hoping, maybe, if you want. Powerless language diminishes our credibility, and it can cause others not to see us as an authority, but rather to kind of see us as a low status member, less important, less likely to have your ideas heard and considered. Right now, you might be saying, hey, Dr. O, what about being polite here? Is it okay to give people a choice, for example, if you want, as we saw in request 1? Yes, certainly. We need to remain aware of context, of the norms of our relationship and our workplace. But at the same time, the way you present your request via your communication choices, it is going to directly impact how others see you. Yes, certainly. I always advocate for you communicating in a respectful, diplomatic way. But you need to be mindful that more often than not, you are the only one who is charged with advocating for yourself, particularly in workplace settings. So now that we know that powerless language can impact the way that others view us and the way that our ideas are received or not received, about the way in which we may be able to develop the growth that we're seeking in the organization, we're going to visit and explore and really make sense of some of these other types of powerless language. So why are we focusing on powerless language? You know what, my friends? When we know what it is, when we can name it, then we can make the conscious decision not to use it. We're going to look at 5 different types of powerless language that are commonly used. So the first one, disclaimers. This idea of denying responsibility, even for someone else. You're probably going to say no, or you probably won't pick this idea, but as soon as we start to use a disclaimer when we are trying to position our idea as the one that should be selected, we are automatically infusing it with a lack of credibility, or I suppose a better way is deflating the credibility that was present in the idea. So again, we're avoiding those disclaimers. We're also going to avoid hesitations. These are conversational fillers that we are very used to hearing, particularly in public speaking. Here's the thing, my friends. I get it. I get sometimes that you just need a little bit of time to be thoughtful and to pick the correct word rather than a reactive response. But instead of filling the air with one of those hesitations, instead of kind of shifting and saying, until we get there in our minds, it is a lot better to just let that silence reside, to not be afraid of that silence, and to use it as a way to indicate to our conversation partner or partners, maybe it's at a team meeting, that we are thinking and that we are going to offer a solution. You're also going to want to avoid tag questions. Tag questions, as the name implies, is when we kind of tag it on to the end of a sentence. Don't you think? Don't you agree? Right? So maybe we say, for the Smiths project, I think that we should use an outside firm to handle the PR. Don't you agree? Don't you think? So instead of just having your declarative sentence when you're asserting this idea, this opinion, automatically, again, take away some of your own credibility, take away some of the ways in which others see you as a leader in that moment by adding that tag question. I want to point out too, in explaining the tag question and offering an illustration and thinking about it, I realized that I said, Now I want to say, again. And certainly I thought about editing that out. I really did. But I think it's really powerful to keep it to show you that, yes, I'm a communication professor. I've been doing this for a long time. I teach this. I write about this. And we're all human, right? So even when we are being really mindful, I am literally trying to teach about powerless language, and I used it myself. So my friends, I want you to take that with you. I want you to kind of pull that out when you need a smile, when you recognize that you have done something like this too, because we are all immune. Just means, again, intention and reflection. So I reflected on that. I am thinking about it. And I'm going to try and slow down going forward. We have two additional types of powerless language, hedges and intensifiers. So when we're hedging, again, that means that we're asserting an opinion, we're throwing an idea out there, and then we are hedging, right? We are trying to add a buffer by saying things like, I guess, or sort of, or kind of. And while that might seem diplomatic in some way, and not feeling too forceful with our ideas, the problem is that when we are using hedges, for example, or other aspects of powerless language, that we aren't communicating with enough clarity and enough intention to even be considered as being too assertive or too forceful, right? Because again, that diminished credibility, we are diffusing the way in our own leadership abilities. We're diffusing our leadership abilities and perceptions there. The last aspect of powerless language we're looking at are intensifiers. When we're thinking of intensifiers, two that are commonly used are words like really and very. Well, certainly there are times that we want to emphasize something, right? We are very passionate about this project. And then it can strengthen that assertion. However, when we are using really and very without a lot of thought, really, really excited about it, or, very worried about this upcoming project, and we continue along that line, then instead of sounding like an empowered and educated and contributing member of this workplace, then we end up sounding a little bit more like a tween version of ourselves, right? I'm really, really excited about this, or math is really, really very, very, very hard today. I'm very upset about this, right? We can laugh about this now, but I want you to go into workplace. I want you to think, especially in meetings, this is something that's done very commonly. And something that, again, without a lot of effort, with just a little intention, that we can be more mindful of to remove that from our daily conversations. So by avoiding powerless language, we automatically sound more assertive because we're focusing on the content. That is, we're focusing on the goal of the exchange. But when we are using powerless language, we can get stuck in thinking about how rather than what we're saying. Request 1 asks for the same outcome as requester 2, yet we can all agree that it was less effective. Hey, there is nothing wrong about asking for an informal chat over coffee. In fact, chatting over coffee is among my favorite things in this world, naturally after the love for my kids, spouse, family, world peace, all of that. But again, if our goal is to demonstrate our readiness to lead, our communication should clearly reflect that. Well, again, we know communication is the means through which we demonstrate and strengthen leadership abilities. And again, bonus, working on your communication skills, it does not require a special purchase. You don't need to spend years of training. Again, we're just boiling this down to intention and reflection. By taking a moment to ask ourselves a few questions, we can be in a position to ask for what we want in a persuasive way. Right? We might start with, what is the goal of this exchange? What am I seeking to get out of this communication encounter? Why am I setting up this meeting? Or why am I making this call? Why am I sending this email? Then I want you to ask yourself who you're communicating with, right? So who is this recipient? Who is the target of this message? And what's the relationship you share with them? Because certainly if it is your peer who is your good friend in and out of work, that's going to be a lot different than the new director that you need to send an email to with a request. And finally, what channel or environment is going to be best? Is this something that should be delivered in a face-to-face, right? Bad news isn't fun, but we can feel a lot more respected when our manager sits down with us to talk about organizational layoffs, right? Maybe face-to-face doesn't make sense. Maybe asking people to get together for a meeting when we can send an email that's going to concisely go over the points, that's going to be better. So again, we're thinking, what is the goal of the exchange? Who am I communicating with? And what's the relationship I share with this target? And what channel or environment is going to be best? Then an element we often skip, a part of the process that we don't even consider many times, reflecting on the success of the outcome. Did that conversation go as you hoped, right? Did that email, was it met and interpreted the way that you had intended or not so much? Did all parties feel respected? Did all parties have the opportunity to express ideas and of course to say no, right? When we actually asked for volunteers, did people know that this was optional instead of feeling like they were voluntold that they had to do something? It can be as simple as asking yourself, am I contributing to and fueling a positive pro-social environment? Or have my communication choices been distracting, disrespectful, or otherwise disempowering to myself or to others? Again, this takes practice. Like anything that is new, it can feel a little strange at first. But the more you practice communicating with intention, that is being mindful about what you say and how you say it, and then also taking time to reflect on the communication, the more you will be seen as a leader and looked to for your leadership abilities. And this brings us to our third and final key point of this podcast. Employees are very, very savvy in terms of discerning managers' behaviors. Earlier, we talked about how visible formal leaders are. Again, your employees and your own leader are looking at you for so many reasons. Cues on how to react after a tumultuous meeting, or feedback after a big presentation. That list goes on and on. But employees aren't watching us just when they're interacting with us personally. They're watching us in formal group settings, team check-ins, for example. They're watching us when we're talking to their peers. Certainly, the way we praise or brush off team members' ideas in a meeting, but also in the ways in which we engage informally with others. Do we talk to someone more casually, or maybe spend a bit more time chatting about our personal lives or in lighthearted banter with Tyrone? Does Tracy seem to always be able to get your time and attention, even when your door's closed? Is Steven your go-to for providing feedback on projects, and then the rest of the team gets a watered-down version through informal conversations with him? This makes me think about something my dad would often say to me and my brother and sister at dinner. Keep your eyes on your own plate. What he meant by that was to get through a semi-peaceful, non-destructive, somewhat timely dinner. It meant that perhaps my brother got slightly more mac and cheese that night, or my sister didn't have to eat her peas, or that I could have an apple instead of pears like my brother and sister. Well, here's the thing, Dad. No one keeps their eyes on their own plates. It just doesn't work that way. We might not say anything about it. We might not raise a stink, but regardless, we tend to be very aware of what we have relative to others. I share this story with you to illustrate that these communication exchanges matter. Not only do they matter, they often have really large implications for the workplace. Do you want your employees to see you as fair, as equitable? Or do you want them to talk about you and who they see as your favorites behind your back, right? My formal leaders out there, I want you to think about 3 things in this regard. 1, you need to manage individual relationships. You need to manage the work group resources. And then I want you to also manage perceptions of these relationships and resources. I know I'm asking a lot of you, but if you are focusing on these 3 pieces of advice, it is going to go a long way in positioning you and your work group for success. When we manage individual relationships, we are being mindful of employees as individual people, not as this collective mass that we manage. Certainly, all of your team members come together and they make up your work group, right? But they all have their individual strengths and their individual preferences. Taking time to get to know them personally, asking them questions. What can I do to be the best manager for you? What have previous managers done that you've liked or that you've disliked? This can go a long way in creating a work environment conducive to work, right? When those interpersonal needs are taken care of and we feel seen, we are best positioned to shine on our tasks. Managing resources can include those things that are tangible, like a performance increase and support for professional development opportunities, perhaps money to travel to a conference, paying for a seminar, training, or those that are less tangible but still highly prized and coveted, like a flexible work schedule or being brought into a prized project and mentorship. By clearly articulating why some of your employees might receive funding for that professional development conference and others might not, whether it is meeting individual goals or simply expressing the desire, members are more able to accept the decisions. When these resources are awarded in less transparent ways, then we leave our work group to make sense of these events on their own. And a lot of times that may mean arriving at an inaccurate interpretation about how they were divided and disseminated in the first place. Finally, my friends, since we know that formal leaders are looked to literally and figuratively, it is essential to be aware of these perceptions of relationships and resources. What does that mean? Because these relationships we share with each individual team member, they emerge and they occur in this work group setting, it is naive and just plain wrong to assume followers are not aware of who is receiving what from the leader. Leaders don't need to feel like they're working under a microscope, but they do need to be mindful of their language, actions, and are communicating clear expectations. And by doing that, they can cultivate a work group that employees see as fair. Transparency is key. When employees know that 2 of their peers, for example, landed the prize account because their sales numbers were 15% higher than everyone else's, that decision makes sense. So when we link these preferred behaviors with rewards and we link discouraged behaviors with consequences, it shows members the expectations while also illustrating that we as the leader, we're treating everyone equitably. With this approach, employees don't have to like the decisions that we make, but they become more palatable if they understand why they were made. All right, friends, we have unpacked a lot today on the Communicative Leader. My hope for you is that you begin considering your communication with the same weight you consider your leadership ability. Better yet, I want you to see these as inextricably tied together where it is impossible to disentangle one from the other. My formal leaders out there, I want you to think about managing relationships, managing resources, and managing perceptions of both. All of my organizational members out there, regardless of your industry, your position, your tenure, you are positioned to lead with or without a title. Your communication decisions and actions are what allow you to emerge as a leader, to develop those trusting relationships, and to navigate conflict and other tricky situations in a respectful and a dignified manner. Want one more tangible to work on this week? Again, avoid that powerless language. On the next episode of The Communicative Leader, we're unpacking how a communicative view is going to make your life easier. Will this help at work? Heck yeah! But will it also help in your personal life at home with friends and family? For sure. All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on The Communicative Leader.